The Old Testament reading is taken from the book of Psalms, chapter 139, verses 1 through 6 and 13 through 18. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. When I was woven together in the depths of the earth, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of sand. When I awake, I am still with you. So ends the reading.
Our New Testament lesson today comes from the 4th chapter of Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth, the 5th through 12th verses. Listen now to God's word for us. For we do not proclaim ourselves. We proclaim Jesus Christ as Lord and ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power comes from God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Has anybody ever called you a crackpot? Kind of like I called my kids when they tried to teach me the verse, "Give me hot sauce for my taco, let me witness in Morocco." That was a new one for me. Have you ever known a crackpot? You know, a crackpot. One of those saints that might be one kitty short of a litter. Maybe have a loose screw somewhere. Somebody whose ideas just don't seem to hold water. Well, welcome to church. Today we all get called crackpots. Paul writes as much in the second letter to the Corinthians, that the treasure we carry, the light of Christ, the glory of the knowledge of God, is being carted around this earth in clay pots, the kind that are shattered with one false move. That's us, actually, isn't it? Shattered with one false move. That's his point. At least I think. Because I'll be honest, I've never been one that's good at pottery. I did once make a clay jar. This was in 3rd grade art class. It was supposed to be a jar. But if you've ever done pottery on a wheel, you kind of form it, and then you drag across a line or something to try and get the opening of that jar to be flat. That's where it all went wrong. So after trying to flatten the opening of the jar a few times and dragging that string across only to make the top more uneven every time, I decided I was going to have to settle for making a bowl. And then, after a few more goes at it, I decided that my bowl would probably best be considered a dish. Maybe a plate. Yeah, I made a plate once. It was glorious. I think my mom still has it. For years and years, it was on the kitchen counter right next to the pig-shaped note holder that I made in 6th grade woodshop. This is not a triumph of artistry. It was pottery, though, in a way. When I think of pottery, I can picture beautiful vases and sculptures and plates and bowls. Why is pottery beautiful? It's artistry. It's creativity. It's making something wonderful out of something ordinary. And it's fragile. See, with the beauty comes fragility. Beauty, we like that. But fragile, it's not always as welcome. Because fragility implies weakness. But that's all part of the beauty. Knowing that at any moment, one false move shatters the whole thing. What is the life that God has given to us? It's artistry. It's creativity. It's something wonderful out of something ordinary, and it's fragile. Now, for Paul, writing this 2,000 years ago to the church in Corinth, it was a little different. See, in Paul's time, the city of Corinth was known for its pottery. Corinth was a major city in the Roman Empire. It was situated on a major east-west trade route. It allowed Corinthian pottery to end up all over the empire. Paul knew about the Corinthian ceramic industry. He's not using the metaphor accidentally. When the church gathered in Corinth and heard his letter read during worship, that allusion to clay jars would have jumped off the page at them. It hit home. Because throughout the ancient world, pottery was everywhere. Everyone but the very, very rich used common clay vessels for everyday use, for everyday storage. The members of First Church Corinth would have had a lot of jars and pots in their homes. Today, if you walk around Corinth or any other archaeological site, you can find broken pieces of pottery everywhere. I was actually walking on the Mount of Olives when I was in Israel. And the guy I was with says, "Hey, check this out." And he kicks the ground, and up pops this. It's a shard of a pot used at one point, they think, for lining the roads, probably. It's kind of neat. It's thousands of years old. It reminds me of sea glass. You know, have you ever looked for sea glass along the beach? We do it all the time when we go on vacation. In a way, it's just garbage, right? Somebody at some point tossed a bottle in the lake, and over time, over the years, with the sand and the waves rubbing at it, it's beautiful. So, there it was, you know, the sea glass of the Holy Land. Fragile? Yeah. But pretty durable, too. I mean, it lasts thousands of years. There are clay pots more than 5,000 years old that have been found intact. You know, actually, in 1947, a shepherd boy wandered into a cave above the Dead Sea, and he discovered a large clay containers, a group of them with treasure inside. There were scrolls more than 2,000 years old. One of the greatest archaeological finds ever. The Dead Sea Scrolls were in clay jars. That's a discovery that's transformed the way we understand first century Judaism, the emergence of Christianity, the whole thing. And it was in a clay pot. Fragile, yet durable and resilient. Just like you and me. Clay jars, human beings. Fragile, durable, resilient. God has placed a treasure, Paul writes, in clay jars. God has placed a treasure in you and me. And God has placed a treasure in the church. You know, it's not perfect, of course, the church. See, there are times that we forget to remove the reserved cards from the first 3 rows so no one sits there after a funeral on Saturday. That might happen. They're laughing because they wanted to sit there and they thought it was reserved. The church isn't perfect. It's made up of people, right? And the church is subject to all of the same ills that the culture is. It's an earthen vessel. But the treasure shines through the cracks. And that vessel, the church, is not to be discarded because it leaks. Because as a vessel, it's pretty impressive. You know, the church was an education before the government. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton were all founded to educate clergy, pastors. The church has been feeding the hungry quietly and faithfully while the powers that be argue over benefits and politics. My cousin, who was a militant atheist, he was pushing against the church one day, and I kind of snapped. Usually I give him some leeway. But see, he was at the same time lamenting the evils of religion, and he was posting a picture of Martin Luther King's March on Selma, decrying the injustices of the world and how no one does anything about it. I couldn't help myself but mention he might want to give the church a little more credit. After all, the picture he posted had at least a half a dozen pastors in the front row of the march, King included, of course. I reminded him that the same day that King preached "I Have a Dream" in Washington, there were other speakers on the program, and 90% of them were faith leaders, Jewish and Christian church leaders, speaking out against injustice. The church has been in the poorest neighborhoods before any latest movement crying out for justice, and the church is going to be there after they move on to another cause. The church is comforting the widows, caring for orphans, and it always has been. It's fragile. The church is always just one generation away from extinction. But the church is pretty durable. It's lasted for thousands of years so far. It may be old, showing its cracks, sure, but it's a treasure. Have you ever been by here at night? Driven past? It's a nice building, isn't it? Sure it is. I think anyone would say that. But as the sun sets, as evening light comes through the stained glass, what about the view from the inside? It's stunning. It's beautiful. It's not just because of the light either. It's because when I sit in the pew and I look up, I can picture so much. I see baptisms, families filled with hope and promise. I see laughter, friends smiling and hugging. I see children singing. I see a giant tree in the middle of the sanctuary for Vacation Bible School. I see Buzz flailing his arms and the choirs giving it their all. I see you all passing communion down the row. I see flowers and caskets out for one last goodbye. I see brides and grooms making promises to one another, nervous and anxious and in love. I see people coming in those doors week after week to sit in the same place they've sat for years, giving all they have to what God is doing here. And I see what I see now. You. I see your faces, your stories, your hopes, your sadness, your generosity, your friendship, and your faith. It's treasure. It's treasure in a clay jar. See, I don't know that you can see that kind of treasure from the outside. I don't think you can understand the church from the outside either. To know what it means to know the treasure, you must be inside. And maybe it must be inside you too. You, me, the church. The glory of God and the gospel of Jesus Christ, all treasure in clay jars, fragile but resilient, afflicted but not crushed, perplexed but not driven to despair, persecuted, not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed. You and me and the church, at our very best, we are artistry, or creativity. We're God making something wonderful out of something ordinary. God makes something eternal, even. Treasure in clay jars to show that the power comes from God and not from us. See, that's somewhere I can put my hope. Cracks or not. Amen.